We are in the French Quarter of New Orleans, home to the famous Bourbon Street and also Frenchman Street. So behind me, that building in pink there was the home of Don Nunez, who led the financial ongoings of Spain when they ruled here in New Orleans. In 1788, he was lighting a candle. It started a fire and it burned down 85% of the city, including most of the French Quarter. So what the Spaniards did when they rebuilt, they banned French architecture and instead they used Spanish architecture. French architecture was known to be more flammable, so by using Spanish architecture, it created a more safe environment in case of fire. That's why in the French Quarter of New Orleans, you'll see a lot of Spanish architecture. New Orleans is very, very hot and humid during the summer, but it can also rain in a moment's notice. So behind me is the original wall from what used to be a slave exchange. So if you see this wall here, it's all original. That's new, but this is all original. They used to have slave exchanges here, so they didn't just sell slaves at auctions, they also had almost like a store for slaves. And if you can see right there, it says the word change. That was part of the word exchange. Behind me there is the Napoleon House. When the French, Napoleon Bonaparte, sold this city and all of Louisiana to America, he still had some followers. So later Napoleon was exiled, and the mayor of the town at the time had a plan to free Napoleon from exile and was going to stow him in this house in hiding. But Napoleon died before that all could happen, but still they call this house the Napoleon House in Napoleon Bonaparte's honor. So when Andrew Jackson saved the city of New Orleans, he had the help of a pirate. This pirate was outlawed initially, but because he volunteered to help the Americans keep the city of New Orleans, rather than the British take over the city of New Orleans, he was eventually pardoned for his crime.
One of the words used to describe people from New Orleans is Creole, which comes from the Portuguese word that is criollo, and that means native born. So it was a word used to identify people who had been born here in the US or in the Americas, but whose ancestors or family or parents came from a European country. And nowadays, people who use that word, Creole, means that they date their heritage back to another country from Europe. Another word used here in New Orleans is Cajun, and that actually is a word that was brought from the Acadians, which were sort of like a tribe or sort of like a community that actually came from Canada and settled down here, and they were called Acadians, but their accent was so heavy that they actually pronounced it something like Acadian or something like that, and it evolved into Cajun, and that's one of the words that is used here in New Orleans as well.
So most of New Orleans is actually under sea level. So when Hurricane Katrina hit, the water levels quickly rose up because pretty much the entire city is under sea level. So it's also why when you see a lot of houses in New Orleans, you'll see them actually not on the ground level, they'll be on steps because this area can flood very easily.
So you can actually see the French flag because of the great influence that the French had here in New Orleans. It was a French colony after all. And then you can also see the flag that belongs to New Orleans City, and it portrays the fleur-de-lis, which is the flower of lis, which is a symbol for the royal family, the Bourbons, who were in power, and actually they ruled a lot of areas in Europe, including Spain as well. Actually, the current king of Spain comes from the line of the Bourbons. The flower of lis is also the symbol for the Saints, the football team here in New Orleans.
Stumbled on the Treme district here in New Orleans, which is apparently America's oldest black neighborhood and the birthplace of jazz, or so they say. They're having a festival right now, so let's go check it out. We are about to ride on the Mississippi River on the Natchez River Cruise. So this is the Mississippi River here behind me. It's considered the largest and maybe the most important river in all of North America. It flows all the way from the northern US, Minnesota, all the way down to here, New Orleans, and eventually empties out into the Gulf of Mexico.
Beautiful experience being on the Mississippi, such an important river for American history. It was a relaxing boat cruise and we got to enjoy some jazz music as well and dance a little bit. So I really recommend coming on a cruise on the Mississippi.
We are in the St. Louis Cemetery in New Orleans. It's a Catholic cemetery built in the 1700s and 1800s, and all the vaults here are above ground. So we are here in Jackson Square in New Orleans, Louisiana, and behind me is the Andrew Jackson Memorial. Andrew Jackson was the 7th president of the United States of America. He was also a military general before he became president. He became nationally known after he won the Battle of New Orleans. He later would serve on the Congress, Senate. He was also a justice of the court. He's most well known modern day for the Trail of Tears. What happened was the Supreme Court said that the Cherokee Nation had sovereign rights, and President Andrew Jackson defied the Supreme Court. He said, no, I'm not going to listen to you, and he kicked the Cherokees out. 15,000 people of the Cherokee tribe were kicked out, and 4,000 ended up dying on the migration that they had to do out west, and that was all due to Mr. Jackson. Behind me stands the oldest Catholic church in the United States of America. Initially it was built in 1727. They later built this church in 1851 over the prior church. It's still considered the oldest standing Catholic place of worship in the United States. Behind me is the Cabildo, and many of you I'm sure know about something called the Louisiana Purchase. Well, it was signed right here in this building. In that agreement, the United States bought a ton of land from the French for what was known to be about 1 cent an acre at the time. With the purchase, they were able to add 13 additional states eventually. The purchase was made in 1803. So we're in Gumbo Shop Restaurant. This is a highly acclaimed place here in New Orleans, right outside Jackson Square, where you can get good local New Orleans food. This is the Sazerac drink. It's a local New Orleans drink, mostly comprised of whiskey. Salud. Well, they gave us bread, but no butter, so we're gonna have it with some garlic hot sauce. So I'm about to eat the jambalaya. This is a Spanish and French mix of food originating here in Louisiana. It's a nice mix of meat and vegetables. Let's taste it, see how it goes.
I will be having a Creole style soup, which has beans, rice, and it's all vegetarian. Creole is a mix of European and African roots, so that's very apparent here in New Orleans with a mix of European, French, Spanish, British, and then also the indigenous and the African roots.
Really good. Like backyard barbecue food. Really good. Well, we came at a good time because the line just got huge.
Hi, we are at Cafe Du Monde, and this is a very famous famous pastry shop where you come for beignets, which is the traditional pastry here in New Orleans. It's kind of like a donut, you know, fried, and it comes with powdered sugar, and it's really delicious. So Dustin's gonna have it for the first time. So they arrive, they smell delicious, and they're warm. So let's have the first bite.
And I've got my chocolate milk, and I'm ready to go. Ooh, it's a little bit hot.
Bar. It's been around since the 1700s. It's one of the oldest bars in the US and definitely in New Orleans.
Shopping around Palace Market right off Frenchman Street, about 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. People are buying all kinds of arts and crafts. So we're at the Spontaneous Pro Store here on Frenchman Street, and I gave him a topic, which was Carina, so he's writing some poetry for us now.
This was an actual profession like 50, 60, 70 years ago when people were illiterate. They didn't know how to read or write. They would go to people like them for letters, for interpreting. So it's nowadays something very romantic, but actually a couple decades ago it was actually a profession.
Over the moon, rather quiet where there wasn't one, a shock to a tiring situation. Around the horn, a wide river disappearing into tyrannies of trees, greenery to the gray, offset in time.
That was our time here in New Orleans, and as they say here, laissez les bons temps rouler, which means let the good times roll.